So today I thought I'd do a brief one here. So let's just a moment while I get my screen ready here. All right. Uh, Okie dokie.
Looks great, Graham.
All right. Well, thanks much. So this morning I thought I would talk a little bit about the minimum maintenance road process designation and its effects, potentially some of its advantages, potentially some of the common pitfalls that you can potentially run into when using this particular statute. So in 1985, the legislature passed this particular law. You're seeing a selection of it up on your screen now, 160.095, which permits road authorities to, under certain circumstances, designate roads as minimum maintenance. So the idea here is, we're gonna allow lower amount of spending on the theory that that's going to create just sort of more access to particularly to rural places in our state. And so, big picture here, they can be maintained at a lower level than other town roads. And then potentially we have this potentially serious advantage of liability limitation for us, for our employees, and for our townships. But of course, these things only apply if we do it properly. So let's take it from the top here. Per the statute that we were just looking at, there are two major parts to getting one of these things done correctly. We need to pass a resolution, and that resolution needs to contain certain things. So we need to have a determination that the road is used only occasionally or intermittently for passenger or commercial travel. And we need to identify the beginning and end points of the roads being designated. So our resolution needs to have both of those things. And we also need to post certain signage. So we tend to take the view that designating a road even that receives even moderate amount of traffic could potentially jeopardize this designation and the protections that it offers. Now, this is not a particularly heavily litigated statute, so we don't have glosses from the Court of Appeals telling us exactly what occasional or intermittently means. Now, we tend to take the view that if you have actual residents, year-round residents on this thing, that's probably one of the reasonable lines. If somebody's traveling this thing every day, it's probably not occasional or intermittent, so it's probably not a great candidate. But if it's something more, if there are, just some hunting shacks up there, if it's just a field access road, something like that, then you're potentially in a much more favorable situation. Now, in terms of the signage, we have a few additional requirements here. So the statute tells us that they shall be posted at the entry points and at regular intervals along the minimum maintenance road, and that they must conform to the Commissioner's Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which repeats our regular intervals type language. Now, hopefully, legislature has completely neglected to tell us what regular means in this case. And we don't have a court that's told us what that means either. So we as an association have some recommendations that we've traditionally given for this sort of thing. And we take the view that regular means signs at least every mile. And then the other potential issue with these sort of situations is that you want to put your entryway signs at a place where people can turn around. Now think about it this way. Some percentage of drivers are not going to be familiar with what these are, and they're going to see that, minimum maintenance travel at own risk type sign. They're going to think, oh, that's pretty obvious or pretty ominous. Excuse me. I don't want to touch that. So they're going to try to turn around. And we don't want them to be trying to drive backwards into the next intersection, or worse, trying to turn around in an area where there isn't room for it and getting stuck or potentially getting hurt. So those are some of the considerations about where that beginning sign should probably go. One of the other recommendations that we have or traditionally made along these things is these resolutions are an important part of maintaining your liability limitations. And so it's important to have them in a place where you know where they are, so that if something happens, you are able to lay your hands on them easily, quickly, instead of having to spend, potentially hours in the archives trying to figure, oh, well, we were pretty sure we designated this one, but we're not. Where is it exactly? When did we do that exactly? We're not sure. So that's definitely a potential serious consideration here. Now, some of the other considerations, our statute does specify that we have to, quote, notify the road authorities of adjoining jurisdictions. Well, they don't tell us what exactly adjoining counts as an adjoining jurisdiction. So there's no statute. The statute doesn't define that. Whoops. How did that happen? All right. Okay, there we go. Statute doesn't define for us what counts as an adjoining jurisdiction, so we tend to take the view that you should send it to the neighboring townships, cities that share a boundary, and then the county as well. That may seem a little bit excessive. Given that we're dealing with an ambiguity, it's best to be belt and suspenders cautious. You don't want to be in a situation where you are relying on that liability limitation, and the court says, actually, no, you needed to do this a different way, right? Now, of course, trunk highways can't be designated minimum maintenance roads, which is not particularly relevant to us, but a road may not be designated as a minimum maintenance road if federal state aid to Minnesota be reduced as a result. Is actually written into the statute, and it's written into the statute that way. That said, the Minnesota Department Transportation Office of State Aid for Local Transportation has indicated that designating town roads as minimum maintenance does not impact Minnesota's aid. Now, if you want to be belt and suspenders about this, if you want to be extra cautious, contact that office before designating a particular road as minimum maintenance. Nevertheless, this is not something that should be impacting any of your candidate roads particularly. So, this shouldn't be affecting you, but if you want to be cautious, and, I like caution. Caution is a good thing. Contacting them is a good idea. Now, the last potential consideration here is another limitation that's written into the statute, which is a road authority may not acquire additional right-of-way to construct a minimum maintenance road without consent of landowners. But interestingly, they write in an exception to that exception right afterwards. We're dealing with a real case of hokey pokey drafting here. Minnesota law provides an exception in cases where the town needs it for drainage or for public safety. Now, generally speaking, your candidate roads are not going to be roads in which this is going to be a major consideration. I don't believe I've ever talked to a township in which somebody has attempted to, in which somebody has been limited by that limitation, never mind attempted to use the exception to the limitation. But, it's our job to make sure you don't take legal risks by accident. So this is something that you should be aware of if you are interested in or attempting to do something like that. Now, this is the big ticket item. This is the one that we run into the most often that is potentially the most problematic, which is minimum maintenance does not mean no maintenance. So this quotation comes from that statute from subdivision 4, and this is the standard by which we're going to be measured against. Minimum maintenance road may be maintained at a level less than the minimum maintenance standards required for state aid highways, roads, and streets, but must be maintained at the level required to serve occasional or intermittent traffic. So, these things can be traps for the unwary. If you get yourself into a situation where you're saying, hey, look, that's a minimum maintenance road, we're not going to touch it, we haven't touched it in a while, all you've done is paint a big red sign saying, hey, look, this liability limitation isn't going to apply to us because we haven't been maintaining it. So you do need to keep it up at the level required to serve that occasional or intermittent traffic. But of course, that is going to be a lot lower potentially than the level at which you need to serve a non-maintenance road. Now, of course, the reason that we'd want to do this, aside from the budgetary reasons, is this one. And this is kind of the big, if we do this correctly, this is one of the major benefits here. You can potentially get some very strong language limiting your liability on these things. Once a road is designated correctly, the road authority with jurisdiction over the road, its officers, employees are exempt from liability for any tort claim for any injury to person or property arising from travel on the minimum maintenance road and related to its maintenance or condition. Now, that's some pretty strong language. That's potentially pretty favorable to you, your employees, and your township. But of course, caution is practically my middle name, so I'll close with a few words of caution about this. Be careful about creating a false sense of security around this language. We don't have a Minnesota appeals case or a Minnesota Supreme Court case telling us exactly what this means. So there's inherently sort of bubbles of ambiguity within this language. It's not been tested at the appellate court level, and as with all matters of liability, it's challenging to anticipate how a court will interpret this language, even language this strongly worded. Nevertheless, I mean, it's always nice to have these language this strong into a statute, language that's favorable to us. So, this is something you can potentially take advantage of, so long as you're being careful to walk yourself through all of the steps before you do it. All right. So let's got some chats here. We have a minimum maintenance road that ends in the middle of a swampy area. So not really a way to put in a turnaround unless we add a lot of dirt here, which will displace a ton of wetlands. So what do we do? Well, so wetlands are by their nature pretty complicated, and it's not like these recommendations are general recommendations. They're not going to be a particularly great fit for everyone for every township road. So when I was talking about convenient place for a turnaround, the concern I think is less in the ending. And I'm Pat from the context of your question, I'm getting the sense that it ends there. What I was more had in mind, or my understanding of the traditional recommendation, I suppose is probably the better way to say this, is that it's related to the entry point more than the exit point, because the concern is that you don't want to end, you don't want people driving backwards. You don't want people who are unfamiliar with these things taking dumb risks to get away from them. So you want to make it easy for somebody who doesn't know what this thing is to not. Now, somebody who's already made it to the end of a minimum maintenance road is a more experienced driver, probably more likely to be a local who's going to be just sort of better at doing this. So I think the concern is less on that side than it is on the other side, if that makes sense. All right. Any other questions? You raising it there, or nope? Sorry, that's an artifact on my screen. All right. All right. Well, in any event, thank you very much for your time and for your attention. Bit of a short one today, but we did just get back from spring short courses, and we've got the Township Law Review coming up. Next time it'll be meatier, I promise.
I actually got a little more there, Graham, so don't send them home yet.
Fair enough.
All right. Sounds like Graham had those. He did the questions. All the questions in the chat you got, right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, cool. All right. I have a couple things I'll mention, things that are coming up frequently lately. One is provision of culverts in the right of way to private owners. And there's been some question about, well, how can the town do this? Can they do it at no cost? Can they do it at some cost? Can we just kind of sell them? We have them on hand and we just decide to sell them. So as in many instances, the answer here is it's going to depend on the circumstances. The place to start would be a statute 160.18, which says townships, you can require a culvert in the right of way with someone's driveway or field approach, and the purpose being so you can maintain good drainage. And the township has the ability to set rules related to culvert sizing, length, depth, obviously, without getting into a wetland issue. You want to be aware of that. Diameter, all these things that the landowner will have to abide by. And that ideally, if you're going to do that, you have some kind of permitting process. And it doesn't have to be something charged. You don't have to take a fee, but you could. You may choose that they apply and they're going to end up doing the work, or a contractor approved with the township just does the work. Or it could be that a town says, no, in the right of way, we're going to do the work. Those are all options open to the township. But the idea is, at the very least, you get notice of when somebody's going to be digging in the right of way and changing your drainage. One of the risks, big risks, is if they don't put in a culvert at all, or if they put in the wrong size or at the wrong depth, or if they change drainage in some way that affects another landowner, well, that landowner could come back to the township and say, township, you allowed them to harm my land by putting excess water on my property or stopping a flow of water that I was expecting to get. That's less common, but you can get claims where somebody says, hey, you flooded out this field. That's a taking, and it can be. It doesn't mean it's going to be on the township, but it can mean a fight to show that it's not on the township. So at the very least, notice of what's going in the right of way is appropriate, and the township considering it and knowing they're going to put in a culvert, and if there's rules, you pass those. Okay. Now, when it comes to actually providing the culvert, the statute here makes it the financial responsibility of the landowner as a starting point. That's been the case for a long time. It used to be a different rule, but we've been decades with our new rule. So it's kind of a new old rule at this point. At the very least, you could say, okay, you have to do this size of culvert, length and diameter. You can source it yourself, landowner. You can describe the material. You can say it must be of these materials to be acceptable. That's one approach. Another approach that towns use is they do purchase culverts and they have them on hand and they're provided to the landowner. And that can be done at no cost by the statute if you have a policy, or some kind of subsidized amount, or the full amount. You really have complete discretion here, except that you can't really make a profit on these things. The government is not there to make a profit on what it's doing. It is there to operate. So it should not be that you have a markup on your culverts and that you're making money off of this. That would potentially be a tax consequence for the township. So you need to decide that. Are you going to offer them free, low cost, no cost? What are you going to do? Some have a policy of we give one per landowner, one per parcel, because each parcel gets an approach. Okay, fine. If they want more approaches per parcel, they may be paying for those, and you may arrange how that happens. It should not be the case that the township is just in the business of selling culverts in the course of commerce. So this has come up, well, we overbuy knowing that people will buy from us. And I guess the question comes to, well, why? What's the government purpose in this? You have a statute that says you can regulate culvert placement and you have some options to give it to them. But we also have something called the public purpose doctrine that says whenever you spend money as a government, you have to have, one, the statute, which we found, but you also have to have a public purpose, meaning something that is a benefit to the community and related to the functions of government. So we got a statute, that's fine. We've checked box one. But the next issue is, well, if you're overbuying culverts that you know the township doesn't need, and you're speculating that landowners will need them, does this provide a benefit to the community? And reasonable people could differ about that. Some could say, yes, we know eventually they'll be used and they're not going to go bad per se. So we could do that. Or maybe you have another reason. Well, we buy to get a discount and we buy in bulk. Okay, maybe this works. That's a different reason than purely we're just going to have them on hand. Okay. Secondly, it has to be related to the functions of government. Well, it's not necessarily a function of government to provide a culvert to a landowner. And this is where some towns could feel it serves a public purpose in their circumstance, and some might not. That takes some discretion on the part of the Board of Supervisors. The possibilities are you have enough culverts and you're going to sell them, but you're not going to make a profit. It's going to be at some low amount. The reasons I've heard to do this, though, are kind of what's questionable or interesting. It's, well, that way the landowner doesn't have to pay for the transport cost of the culvert. So it's okay. So we're kind of putting these culverts on the township's credit to just hang on to, so that when a landowner needs them, they can buy it at lower cost. That is a questionable legality, because what public purpose is there in paying the transportation fee for a landowner. How does that relate to the business of government? And I think there's pretty strong arguments that it does not. As a recommendation, I think it would be wise for a township to set its policy on, are you going to provide these culverts or not? And if you do, what are the costs, what are the circumstances you're going to provide them, and why are you buying them? So is it because you want quality control and you want them to come from a particular place, or you want a particular material and you're going to buy it so you have the landowner have the right item? Maybe this is a good governing purpose. Okay, but if it's just to save them transport fees, if it's to not charge them sales tax, that's another big problem. Okay, so you should have good reasons, not necessarily related to the financial concerns of the individual. Looks like we have a question here. Okay, do we need to do anything if someone put in a culvert to gain access to their hunting shack? No notice was given. Well, arguably, well, not arguably, it is a violation of a particular statute. The statute is 160.2715, and it lists 13 items, 13 things that are misdemeanors if you do them in the right of way without a permission or permit. And digging is one of them, or changing the grade, changing the sloping, which you would have to do for any culvert. If they put in a culvert, that might be a good sign. They have at least accommodated the idea that there will be drainage, but the town may want to go and inspect and decide, okay, is this the right height? Is it going to cause any problems? Is it of the right size? Is it of the right length? And have some idea of what's going on there. You could force them to take it out and put in a proper size culvert. They tend to want to save money. They'll put a smaller culvert. Maybe that cannot accommodate the amount of water at times. And that's going to erode your roadway. The excess is going to erode the ditch on one side, but it's also going to erode the road itself. And that's your public reason of saying, no, you're not going to put in that size of culvert. You're going to do the proper sizing. And you may be able to go back and fix that or make them fix it. So that can actually be ticketed by a law enforcement officer if you need to. Ideally, they'll just work with you to get the right size culvert in there. If they own all the land around, I guess the problem is drainage doesn't stay in one place, right? It goes to the next place. And we've seen those cases where you change drainage on one road and some distance away, it's not the neighbor next door. Somebody says, hey, you changed this and it caused me this problem. It was a taking, an invasion taking. It was loss of my productivity if it's a production field. It's damage to my home if it flooded their home. So you got to be careful with any drainage questions like that. One other caveat, I guess, if you overbought culverts and they're true surplus, okay, you can sell them off. You know, you're not trying to make a profit here again, but you can get rid of surplus in general, and that would apply to these things. The issue is you can't overbuy every time, conveniently saying everything is surplus every time. It kind of looks pretty transparent. You're just trying to give culverts to people at discounted rates. So be cautious with that kind of thing. All right, had another question. This is no funding for minimum maintenance. I don't think this one was answered, right, Graham? It was not. Okay. No, a minimum maintenance road is a road. I don't believe there is any, the only roads that don't get gas tax dollars are those that are not open at least 8 months out of the year. Well, if your minimum maintenance road is open at least 8 months out of the year, it is just like any other road. And I have a love-hate relationship with this minimum maintenance road statute because it is one of the most misunderstood concepts of town law. It is the idea, oh, well, let's post a sign and we never have to touch it, as Graham mentioned. It comes up with these, well, doesn't that mean we don't get gas tax? Well, no, it doesn't say that anywhere. I think it creates a status that causes more questions sometimes than it helps. And the idea is once you post it that way, you know, you're supposed to be free of certain liabilities, but not that it won't happen, but I haven't seen a claim on a minimum maintenance road that we can say, oh, look, we posted the sign, we have no liability. It's just not that common. So that minimum maintenance thing is a very, very limited idea. Don't let it bleed into anything else. It does not bleed into tax. It does not bleed into what you get on gas tax. It does not bleed into abandonment or anything like that. It is its own concept. It is a road like any other. It is just maintained a little less. And then all we're doing is putting people on notice of it. We maintain it a little less. That's it. And nothing else changes other than where it says it in the statute. So, all right. With that, we're almost at 40 minutes. So I'll leave that there. Do we have any questions today? I see nothing. Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here. And we'll be back to our normal schedule here, I think, with Town Tuesdays. So get back into the normal swing of things. So thanks for being here.